Why does Trump keep saying the Iran war is almost over, even as the war keeps changing? Welcome back to Amerixa Daily, the channel where we break down the world's biggest political stories, hidden patterns, and global power games in a way most media outlets never do. If you enjoy deep dive content like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel because it really helps us bring you more videos like this. I want to talk to you about something that sounds almost impossible. A war keeps changing shape in real time. Entire strategies collapse overnight. Bombings become blockades. Ceasefires appear, then disappear. Oil markets panic. Global shipping routes freeze. Intelligence agencies quietly revise their assessments. Military analysts disagree on who's actually winning. And yet, the message coming from the top barely changes. For months now, Donald Trump has repeated the same core talking points about Iran again and again. It's almost over. Iran has been devastated. They want a deal. We're in total control. The words stay nearly identical, even while the war itself transforms. Think about that for a moment. We're talking about one of the most volatile geopolitical conflicts on Earth. A conflict affecting oil prices, global trade, military alliances, elections, and potentially nuclear policy. The Strait of Hormuz alone handles roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply. One disruption there can shake economies across Europe, Asia, and the United States. And still, the public messaging sounds strangely frozen in time that it's almost like watching a movie where the background changes every scene, but the actor keeps reading the exact same line. Beat. Now maybe that's normal. Maybe political leaders repeat messages because consistency builds confidence. But here's the puzzle. At what point does repetition stop being information, and start becoming strategy itself? Because this isn't just about Iran anymore. This is about something much larger. How modern political power works during uncertainty. How narratives survive even when facts evolve. And how, in moments of chaos, controlling perception can become just as important as controlling reality. And once you see the mechanism behind it, you start noticing it everywhere. Beat. Let's start with the obvious explanation. Because at first glance, this all seems pretty simple. And that's exactly why it's dangerous. The obvious answer, and why it breaks down. The obvious answer is this. Politicians repeat talking points because they want to appear strong. Simple. When people are anxious, leaders project certainty. During wars, markets panic easily. Allies become nervous. Citizens lose confidence. So leaders simplify the message. We're winning. It's under control. It'll be over soon. That's the standard explanation. And on a small scale, that logic makes sense. Think about a football coach losing a game. Imagine if every 5 minutes he ran to the media and admitted complete uncertainty. We don't know what's happening. Our strategy failed. The other team adapted faster than expected. The players would panic. Fans would panic. Sponsors would panic. So instead, coaches repeat confidence even while adjusting internally. That's normal leadership psychology. But here's where the analogy starts breaking down. Because this isn't a football game. This is a geopolitical conflict involving nuclear fears, global shipping routes, oil markets, intelligence agencies, military alliances, and millions of lives. And when the messaging remains unchanged for months, despite major shifts on the ground, something more complicated may be happening. Beat, here's where it gets fascinating. The contradiction isn't just that the message stays consistent. It's that the message itself begins shaping reality. Think about it. If you constantly say a deal is very close, markets behave differently. Investors calm down. Allies delay criticism. Citizens psychologically prepare for resolution instead of escalation. The narrative becomes a stabilizing force, even if the underlying situation remains unstable. Beat. And this pattern repeats constantly in modern politics. Economic crises become temporary slowdowns. Military stalemates become strategic pauses. Inflation becomes transitory. Recessions become soft landings. The language isn't necessarily designed to describe reality perfectly. It's designed to manage public reaction to reality. That's the part most people miss. Beat. Because once messaging becomes a tool of stability, consistency matters more than accuracy. And suddenly, repeating the same talking points during a changing war no longer looks irrational. It starts looking intentional. But to understand why this works so effectively, we need to peel back the layers. Because underneath the headlines, there's an entire system operating on psychology, repetition, and perception control. And the deeper you go into it, the stranger it gets. Layer by layer reveal. Layer 1, the narrative machine. Let's start with the first layer. Modern political messaging isn't designed like a conversation. It's designed like branding. Think about the biggest companies on earth. A luxury brand repeats the same emotional message for decades. A fast food chain repeats the same slogan endlessly. Tech companies repeat the same promises about innovation and simplicity. Why? Because repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates trust. And trust creates emotional stability. Politics now works the same way. Especially during crisis. Beat. When Trump repeatedly says, "We're in control." They want a deal. It's almost over. He's not just describing events. He's reinforcing a psychological frame. America strong. Iran weak. Victory inevitable. That frame matters because wars are no longer fought only on battlefields. They're fought through media cycles, investor confidence, polling numbers, diplomatic pressure, and public morale. In other words, narrative itself becomes part of the battlefield. Think about that for a moment. The message isn't separate from the war. The message is part of the war. And once you understand that, the repetition starts making much more sense. Beat. But here's where the paradox deepens. Because the audience isn't passive anymore. Millions of people can compare speeches, clips, timelines, and contradictions instantly online. They can watch old interviews within seconds. They can fact-check narratives in real time. So why repeat the same script anyway? Because modern messaging often isn't trying to convince everyone. It's trying to maintain emotional alignment among enough people to preserve momentum. That's the real objective. Not universal belief. Emotional stability. And that brings us to layer 2. Layer 2, the public wants stability too. Here's the twist. Citizens often criticize political messaging, while simultaneously depending on it psychologically. That sounds contradictory. But watch carefully. Imagine waking up tomorrow to headlines saying, "We have no idea where this conflict is heading. Energy markets may collapse. Military escalation appears unpredictable." What happens next? Markets panic. Oil spikes. Businesses freeze hiring. Consumers stop spending. Social media explodes with fear. Confidence itself becomes fragile. So leaders simplify uncertainty into digestible narratives. And surprisingly, many citizens prefer it that way. Beat. Because human beings struggle to function during prolonged uncertainty. We crave coherent stories. Beginning. Middle. End. Good guys. Bad guys. Winning. Losing. Progress. Resolution. The brain wants closure. That's why phrases like "almost over" are incredibly powerful, even when they remain vague. Soon, creates hope without requiring precision. And hope stabilizes people. Beat. Here's where it gets fascinating. The public often participates in the illusion voluntarily. Supporters amplify optimistic messaging because it reinforces identity and confidence. Opponents amplify contradictions because it reinforces outrage. Both sides spread the narrative further. And the cycle feeds itself. The conflict becomes not only a military event, but a giant emotional ecosystem. Beat. Now let's bring this down to the human level. Because this system doesn't exist in abstract. It shapes real lives every day. Layer 3, the human story. Imagine a retired schoolteacher named David living in Ohio. David watches the news every evening. He hears that the Iran situation is under control. He hears a deal is close. He hears America is dominating strategically. And honestly, he wants to believe it. Because David's retirement account depends on market stability. His pension fund holds energy stocks. His savings react to inflation. His grocery prices rise when oil prices rise. His grandchildren's future feels connected to whether global conflicts spiral out of control. So when leaders project confidence, it doesn't just affect his political opinion. It affects his emotional security. Beat. But at the same time, David also senses something strange. Every week the story changes slightly. One day it's a ceasefire. Next day it's renewed threats. Then new sanctions. Then another promise that negotiations are close. The details shift constantly. But the emotional script remains identical. And deep down, he begins wondering. Am I being informed, or reassured? That's the modern paradox. Beat. Because in the information age, leaders are no longer just communicating facts. They're managing national psychology in real time. And citizens become caught between two competing desires. The desire for truth. And the desire for stability. Sometimes those desires align. Sometimes they don't. Beat. And this isn't unique to one politician. That's important. You can find similar patterns across governments, parties, countries, and ideologies throughout history. During crises, leaders simplify. They repeat. They reassure. They project inevitability. Because uncertainty is politically dangerous. And once you notice that pattern, you start hearing speeches differently. Not as pure information, but as emotional architecture. The mind shift conclusion. So let's connect the layers. At first, the contradiction seemed bizarre. A war changes dramatically, but the talking points barely change. That felt irrational. But now we can see something deeper happening. The messaging was never only about describing the war. It was about stabilizing perception of the war. Beat. Here's the core principle. Modern political communication often functions less like reporting reality, and more like managing uncertainty. That's the shift. And once you understand that, a lot of things suddenly click into place. Why leaders repeat phrases endlessly. Why vague optimism appears constantly during crises. Why certainty is projected even when events remain unpredictable. Because confidence itself becomes a strategic resource. Beat. Now, that doesn't automatically mean every statement is false. That's not the point. The point is that messaging operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Information. Psychology. Stability. Identity. Narrative control. And in the modern world, those layers are deeply intertwined. Beat. Here's where it gets truly unsettling. Most people think propaganda looks obvious, giant posters, censorship, dramatic speeches. But modern narrative management is often much softer than that. It sounds reassuring, predictable, comforting. It repeats until familiarity starts feeling like truth. Beat. And maybe that's why this story matters far beyond Iran. Because the real question isn't whether one specific prediction comes true. The real question is this. How much of modern politics is about managing reality, and how much is about managing our perception of reality? Think about that for a moment. Because once you start noticing the scripts behind major events, you can never completely unhear them again. And the next time a leader tells you everything is under control, you may find yourself listening not just to the words, but to the pattern underneath them. And that's what makes this entire story so fascinating, because sometimes the most important battle isn't happening on the battlefield at all, it's happening inside the narrative itself. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Amerixa Daily for more deep geopolitical breakdowns just like this. And now I want to hear from you. Do you think these repeated talking points are a strategy to maintain stability, or do you think they're designed to shape public perception in a much deeper way? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.